Hey guys, Ryan Sprague here, and before we get to this week's episode, we've got a really great partnership going on right now with Podchaser. Now through April 16th, Podchaser is donating 25 cents to Meals on Wheels America's COVID-19 Response Fund. For every podcast or episode review on Podchaser, you'll be helping those in need during this very challenging time, and you'll also be helping the Somewhere in the Skies podcast with your reviews. So, be sure to head on over to podchaser.com and just search for Somewhere in the Skies. You have the benefit of reviewing the show as a whole, or you can also review every episode individually. Every review is a 25-cent donation, so you can literally review as much as you want. That is a substantial amount of donations, so thank you to Podchaser, and thank you to you in advance for helping out. Again, head over to podchaser.com and just search for Somewhere in the Skies, and let's help individuals and families in need. Be safe, be well, and now, on with the show.
This is Somewhere in the Skies with Ryan Sprague.
Hey Ryan, my name is Brandon, and I thought I would take this opportunity to share my story about two sightings that I've had in my life. I don't share these with just anybody and everybody typically. The first event happened back in 2003, and I've shared that with maybe a dozen people since then, people that I trust and I know believe me, and trust what I say. And so anyways, I just got inspired listening to others share their encounters, and I thought I would do the same. So like I said, the first of the two sightings that I've had happened back in 2003 in the summer. I was in Northern Neck part of Virginia, towards the coast, and it's a very agricultural, rural area, a lot of woodland out there too. My friend Jen and I had been out there visiting a mutual friend, and we were on our way back to her parents' house in Southern Maryland where we were staying for the night. And we were driving along a 2-lane road. It was a very dark night. I emphasize that because it made the encounter that we had quite a bit more intense, I believe, because it was like a black canvas out that night. There weren't any street lights around. There was just thick woods on both sides of this 2-lane road that we were driving along, and it was kind of a straight, narrow road. And so we're riding along, and I'm in the passenger seat. I look down to pick out a CD out of a CD book that she had. This was, pre-digital music era. And I'm looking at her CDs, and as I'm doing so, I see this very intense blue light come pouring in the windshield. And so I immediately look up, and keep in mind, this whole thing lasted maybe 5 seconds, but I remember so vividly every millisecond of it that when I play it out in my head, it feels much longer than that. But, this blue light fills the car. I look up, and to the left above the tree line, I see this brilliantly bright blue light that's kind of oblong shaped, kind of shaped like a football. The color was like a little bit lighter of a royal blue color. It was all that same color, and it was glowing intensely bright. And so in my head, if it had just been me, I might have questioned myself. I will point out neither of us were intoxicated in any way. No drugs, no alcohol that night. We were sober as could be, both of us. And I might have questioned, even though I was sober, that my eyes are playing tricks on me or something like that. But the second that it clicks in my head, like I'm thinking in my head, what is this? Jen says that exact thing out loud. She's like, what is that? And that made the hair stand up on my arms, because to me that added so much validity in that moment. She's seeing it too. So almost immediately, like a second or two after that, after she says that out loud, it went from this stationary position in the sky. And I'll point out, I had nothing to compare it to in the sky because the sky was so dark out. I couldn't tell if it was close and smaller or if it was far away and larger. There was no sense of scale to apply. But it went from completely stationary to just basically gone in like the snap of a finger. And I know that it didn't just vanish or turn its lights off or something, that it actually quickly jetted away, because again, it was so dark out and this object was so bright that my eyes were able to pick up just a split second of a trail. I saw this blue streak take off, which was pretty much parallel with the road we were traveling on. It just shot straight ahead in the same direction we were going at lightning speed. I can't even begin to fathom how fast. But if it hadn't been for that trail that my eye picked up for just a split second to attest to that, I wouldn't have had any clue what happened to it. Now, I can't speak to if it made any sound or not. We did not have the windows down. We were listening to music, so I can't speak to that portion of it. But what I did witness, both of us, we could not explain. Jen got very shook up by it. She was physically shaking. And for our safety, I encouraged her to pull over and let me drive the rest of the way home. And so we did that. We traded seats. Once we got back in the car, Jen had the idea. She said, let's not talk about it for now. Let's wait till we get back to my parents' house, and I'll get some colored pencils and some paper, and we'll draw out what we saw and compare the two and see if we think we saw the same thing. So we did that. We said maybe 5 words the rest of the ride home. And then we got back to her parents' house in Southern Maryland, and she went first. She sat at the kitchen table and drew hers out. I sat in the living room and tried to distract myself and calm myself down by watching a couple of minutes of TV. Once she was done, we traded out, and I did the same thing. And then we compared the two, and we drew the exact same thing, the exact same shape. We used the same color for it. We drew it in the same position above the tree line to our left. It was a mirror copy, basically, of one another. And we felt like that added another layer of validity to the fact that it was something tangible. It was something that was truly there in the sky in that moment, and it looked and behaved like nothing we had seen before. So after that, I had always kind of, since I was younger, been a believer. I always kind of understood the fact that, this universe is infinite, and who are we to say there is not an abundant amount of life out there, whether it be in our own reality, our own universe, whether it's coming from some sort of other dimension. I have no clue, but I know that the possibility for it to come from elsewhere in this universe, the fact that life certainly exists elsewhere in the universe, I went into that experience already believing it's fairly likely, but seeing that really added to that. It really reinforced the idea that the things that people claim to see, they're probably, a lot of them are probably telling the truth. Of course, a bunch of them are probably making it up and wanting attention, but, I experienced it too. I became one of those people. And so that was my first sighting. The second sighting happened 16 years later. It was actually early fall 2019, just last year. And I stopped at a gas station in Roanoke, Virginia, where I live, and ran in the gas station real quick. I came back out, and it was a beautiful day, blue skies, no clouds. It was about 5:15 in the afternoon. So it was too early for stars to be plentiful in the sky, anything like that. But I happened to look up, and I was looking around at the beautiful blue sky, and I looked to my right of where I was standing, and I kind of turned, and I saw this round, solid white object in the sky, and it was literally the only thing in the sky. It was the only thing on this blue canvas of a sky that I saw. And so I thought, that's interesting. And I'm thinking to myself, like, what could that be? My first thought was maybe it was a plane or a drone or something like that, but it made no noise. In a similar circumstance to the first encounter, there was no sense of scale to apply. It was just a blue sky with nothing else around it. So I thought, well, if it's a plane, then I'll stand here and watch it from the same perspective for a couple of minutes. And if it gets larger or smaller, then I can assume it's a plane either coming my direction or going away. But I knew it wasn't traveling left or right. It did not sway in that position for a minute. So I'm watching to see if I do see a change in size. And then after a couple of minutes, it starts erratically moving around the sky, and at varying speeds. It went left, right, up, down, diagonal, at slower speeds, at very quick speeds, where it's like it just like portal jumped to a different part of the sky. And I was by myself in that moment watching it and just flabbergasted, trying to figure out what is that. And it's not making any sound. It's quiet as can be. And then I noticed that there's about a dozen other people in the parking lot looking up at the same thing. And while it's bouncing around the sky, and, we're all just standing there kind of, bumfuzzled by what we're seeing. And we all end up kind of congregating together in the middle of the parking lot and watching it together for probably 15 minutes. And I was actually the last to give up on watching it. I was actually the only one that stood there and watched it until it vanished. And I couldn't tell where it went. It just vanished. But everybody stood there for several minutes and we talked. I stood there for at least 15 minutes watching it and could not explain its movements. It did not behave like anything that I've ever seen in person or, through video or anything like that. I cannot even begin to explain how it was moving in the way that it moved. Like I said, it was solid white, and I don't know if it was glowing white of its own accord or if it was perhaps reflecting the sun, and that was giving it a white appearance. But again, very erratic. Aerial vehicles that we've designed at this point in our history cannot and does not move that way. And so I did take some video of it, but unfortunately the video is not very compelling because, again, with it being a solid blue sky, I'm moving my phone around to keep it in the frame, but you're still just seeing blue everywhere it goes. So when you go back and watch the video without being there, it just looks like an object that's staying completely still against this blue sky, but it was actually kind of moving all over the place. So, anyways, yeah, like I said, these experiences just reinforced my opinion that there's something that out there that we can't explain. At least the public is not aware of and able to explain. It doesn't scare me. It excites me. It gets my mind going as to what it could be. And those possibilities, of course, are endless. But, it's it's apparent when you experience something like that, like so many of your listeners have, that you can't even begin to explain it, that you don't know how to put it into a perspective that fits your known reality. It's just something, you know, it was as crazy to me as if a dragon came flying down out of the air and flew overhead. Like it's just something that doesn't fit our reality, what we know of existence. And to me, that's very exciting. And I hope in my lifetime, I'll get more answers. We all will than we are now. So anyways, thanks, Ryan. I appreciate you fighting the good fight. I love your podcast. Avid listener. Keep it up, man. Thanks.
Hi, Ryan. My name is Vince Busey. I live in Brunswick, Ohio, which is just right outside of Cleveland, Ohio. And we had just moved into a new house, and our old house was less than a mile away. And my routine was that I would work my 9-to-5 job. And after I'd spend time with the family and eat dinner, I would get ready to go work on the old house to get it ready to sell. One night, I finished up, I'd say about 1 a.m. And on the way home, I entered my development, and I was going west, and I saw something in the sky that I know I had not seen, at least in the last few days. It was probably about visually 2 inches above the tree line, and it was strange enough that I stopped and got out of my car to take a look at it. Now, granted, I was pretty tired. I looked at it, and I was going to just shrug it off, but I was about 1,000 feet from my driveway. So I drove that, got in my driveway, got out and took another good look at it. And I just knew something wasn't right about it. And I'll give you an idea of what it looked like. First of all, in the night sky, it was slightly larger than my thumb. And I wouldn't say that it was giving off light. I would say that it was illuminated. It wasn't like shining, but the way I would explain it was it looked like the moon would, low on the horizon on a hazy, humid, dark night. It was just an eerie, like a vanilla-looking white. So anyways, I stood there and I watched it, and then I thought to myself, you know what, no one is going to believe me about this. So I ran into the house. Now, this was a school night, and it was probably 1:30 a.m., and I woke my daughter and my son up. My daughter's 16 years old at this time. My son was 13 years old. I got them to come outside, and my son, being the skeptic that he is, probably lasted about 3 minutes taking a look at it, and he said, "I'm going inside." But I know that he went inside because he was scared. You could see the fear in his eyes. So he went inside. My daughter and I stayed out in the driveway, watched it a couple more minutes, and then I realized, hey, you know what? I got binoculars, and I knew exactly where they were because I did all the boxing when we moved out of the old house. So I came in, I got the binoculars, and ran back outside, and I took the first view out of the binoculars, and I couldn't believe what I was looking at. I was looking at something that was kind of egg-shaped, not as dramatic as an egg-shaped. It was wider than it was tall. And the best way I can describe it is the bottom of it looked like it was made out of old clad iron, like rivets, like you'd see on an old ship or an old submarine with seams. But it just looked old. And from the halfway point up, it looked really modern. And the best way I could describe the upper part is if you were looking from underneath up, looking at a bridge, like with girders. And I remember vividly seeing what looked like lures, like you'd see on an old Z28 or an old muscle car, you see those lures. And then also I remember, and this is going to sound crazy, but the top of it was shaped like a genie's lamp. That's the best way I could describe this thing. I gave the binoculars to my daughter, and she didn't have the words that I had to explain it, but she explained it pretty much the same way that I had said it. So we watched it, I'd say probably for about another 5 minutes, trading off binoculars. And this thing just was not moving. It was just in the sky, and it was not moving. So I looked at it through the binoculars again, and it scared me to death because something had changed. To me, it looked like it was sitting on top of like a pedestal, like a gray-white pedestal. That's the best way I can explain it. Very rigid edges. So I handed the binoculars to my daughter, and I asked her, tell me what's changed. I didn't want to tell her what I had seen, but I said, tell me what's changed. And she looked at it, and she looked at me, and she said, oh my God, Dad, that's a beam of light coming out of this thing. So we both, at that point, we were freaked out. And she lasted probably about another 2-3 minutes, and she was scared to death. She ran inside. I, on the other hand, stood out probably for about another 2 to 3 minutes with and without the binoculars. And I, too, felt the exact same thing. I felt fear. I felt dread. I felt like I was seeing something that I was not supposed to see. And ironically enough, that's how my daughter sort of explained it. So I came inside. I was exhausted. And I took a shower. And then I went to bed. Once in bed, I realized I could see this thing still. I could see it right out my window. And then this is when I noticed this thing actually is moving. And it was moving so slow that the only way I could tell was by the frame of my window. I watched it in comparison, and it was moving so slow, like you would see the moon move. If you were sky watching, it was moving horizontally, though. And I watched it for at least another 15 minutes, and then I don't remember anything. I had fallen asleep. In the morning, I decided I was going to make a call to MUFON, and I did that. And it must have been a pretty good story because within 24 to 48 hours, I had a field investigator at my doorstep. And it was really nice to have someone to tell my story to, and he did a great job of showing me with his program what was supposed to be in the night sky, what was in the night sky, and what shouldn't be in the night sky. And what I saw that night was not supposed to be there. I did get some pictures of it, but it was with an old flip phone, but it was still enough to see that there was something there. So my story is on MUFON. It does have a case number. This experience has been both amazing and terrifying, but I cannot wait to hopefully see something like this again. Thank you again, Ryan, for letting me tell my story, and I love your show. Have a good night. Bye.
Hey y'all, Ryan Sprague here. As you all know, the Somewhere in the Skies podcast is always free to consume, but it isn't free to create. That's why I've started the Somewhere in the Skies Patreon campaign. On a monthly basis, you give what you think the show is worth. You'll be helping the show continue, grow, and to be something truly communal. And remember, there are rewards for each level of contribution, and the list is only growing. So please, help Somewhere in the Skies now by becoming a patron. To contribute and to learn more, visit www.patreon.com/somewhereskies. Thank you for your support. And now, on with the show.
Hey there. I don't know the exact date, but I know it was June of 1970. I was sitting in my bedroom listening to the Phillies game, and then my sister comes running in saying, Ken, there's a flying saucer outside, screaming at the top of her lungs. And I'm like, yeah, right. And I thought she was just fooling around because she knew I was into reading UFO books and whatnot. So anyway, I go outside, and I'm like, holy crap. And there was a whole bunch of people from the neighborhood looking at this thing. It must have been about 100 feet high off the ground. It was circular, and it had multicolored lights going around the center of it. And I do remember that one of the lights was black. I mean, maybe there wasn't a light there, but it was blacked out. The section where the light should have been was blacked out. And I just watched it. Then my father came home, and he's like, what's everyone looking at? I'm like, can't you see it right there? And he's like, holy crap, too. And he took out his binoculars and looked at it, and I asked him, well, what does it look like through the binoculars? He says, the same, only bigger. And then after we watched this for about an hour, the lights just went out on the thing, and where it used to be was just blank space in the sky there. And then that was it. And I went inside, and every hour I'm coming out. Well, actually, every half hour I'm coming out to see if it came back, but it never did.
So I was 18 and in college at University of Colorado at Boulder. So I was in Boulder, Colorado. And if you don't know, Colorado, near the Denver area, is actually, or just Colorado in general, I think, they have a lot of UFO sightings in Colorado. I wasn't thinking about that, though, at the time. So it was a nighttime thing. I was out, bored, and no friends. This was my first semester of college, and I decided to climb it's ironic because I climbed the astronomy building. It was like, the side of the building was like, it wasn't very tall. It was like slanted, and they had like bricks going up, kind of like a pyramid. I don't know how to describe it. So I climbed up the side of it and was sitting up there, doing whatever. So I'm looking up at the stars, and I see this constellation. It's like a square, but it's like moving slowly, very slowly, and I'm like, that is weird. So I'm watching it, and I'm like, there's no way those are stars. They're not airplanes because they don't move. They're not making noise. It wasn't helicopters. It was just silent, like moving across the sky slowly. So I was like, that's weird. I didn't really think anything of it. And so I was like, that's strange. Anyway, I'm sitting there still. Right after that, I don't remember how long it was going for. Right after that, though, this V formation of lights looking like stars, but much lower than the first one. And when I say V formation, it's like, when geese are flying south for the winter, or wherever they fly, and they fly in that V formation, this is how these stars were aligned. And they flew over fast, and low, and no sound, flew over quick, and I was like, shook. I was like, whoa, what the heck was that? I was like really shook up about that. And so I was like, oh my God, that was UFOs. That's weird. So I called my dad. I climb up off the tower, and I call my dad because he's into conspiracies and UFOs and all that. And I'm telling him about it, and all of a sudden my phone disconnects, and I can't call out for 10 minutes. And eventually he was able to call back, and he was scared because it was saying the number you're trying to reach is out of service area. I don't know. It was a weird message we never heard before, but I totally believe in UFOs. Now, when I say I believe in UFOs, Colorado has a lot of military installations. So when I say UFO, it could have been, it's just an unidentified flying object. It could have been government technology. It could have been top secret technology, or it could have been aliens. I don't know. I'm open to all things. I have a very open mind, but I've definitely seen them. When I moved to New Orleans, I've seen UFOs as well. Now here, when I saw UFOs, when I saw the UFOs in Colorado, they were like the color of stars, so white, I guess. They just literally look like stars that are moving fast. So, but when I moved here, I've seen UFOs like that before too, but I've also seen they were red. And they will, at first I think they're airplanes, but when you watch them, they're not moving like airplanes, because they'll stop, or they will zoom around, or they They just don't move like planes, you know? They'll go up, down, whatever. For a moment in my life, I was like obsessed with it, like always looking outside, always looking in the sky to see if there's UFOs. That drove me a little bit crazy. So then I let it go. But I've definitely seen UFOs multiple times, and you know, I don't understand it or what's going on, and I believe that they are there, and they are there. And I'm like, I see you, I know you are there, but what can I do about it? Nothing. They're real, and I've never had anything happen where like they land or I see any aliens, because that would probably just shake me to my core, and I don't know if I'd survive, you know? And that's all I gotta say on that.
Hello. My name is Andy, and I wanted to share a UFO experience I had with two of my friends back in 2003. It was in the Sierra Cascades, Northern California. It was northwest of Lake Philbrook, which is, I'd say, 20 miles northeast of Sterling City, California. Dirt roads, you know, a lot of logging roads up there. And I want to say it was July, being there's, at that altitude, it's around 7,000 feet. There's usually snow around 8 months out of the year. And when we were up there, there was no snow. We were in t-shirts. It was warm weather, so it had to have been right at the hot point of summer. Anyway, I guess I'll get started. So we like always, you know, we drive up those logging roads. I had an old 1970 Ford pickup sport custom truck. I love that thing. Went everywhere and anywhere we possibly could in the mountains up in this area. So we found plenty of places to camp. And one place we liked in particular, it was an old logging ground, and it was a pretty nice spot. It was like being in a miniature forest. Anyway, me and my friend Jason and Ira drove up in my truck, and we get there, and at that time it was still daytime when we got there. You know, we just, you know, hung out for a while, went hiking, did what we usually do, just explored the area, talked about random stuff. At the time, Ira was really delving into Christianity, and he was really fascinated with Revelations in particular at that time. So he brought his Bible, and he kind of tortured me and Jason a little bit, talking, you know, just reading out of Revelations and basically saying the world was going to end at any time. And anyway, we just kind of let him do his thing, and kind of fun to philosophize about. Anyway, I don't know what time it was. Sun had been down for an hour or two at this point. And, you know, we had a fire already and cooked our meals, and we were just sitting in the back of the truck. And yeah, first thing I remember is hearing it, and it's really difficult for me to describe. I cannot make the sound. I can't mimic the sound with my own voice, and I don't know if I could even do it really. Maybe with a computer, I don't know. But the best way I can describe it is if you can imagine a two-stroke motorcycle idling, and then mix that with a dog growling, and then submerge both of those sounds in water so they're bubbling. So it's like a muffled underwater motorcycle that's idling but growling at the same time. That's what we heard. You're gonna have to use your imagination, I guess. Anyway, that's the first thing, and you know, I'm like, what? You know, I look at Jason, I look at Ira, and kind of like, okay, like this is a weird sound, and I look up, and it had to have been at the very least, a large craft the size of an entire football stadium, not just the field, but the whole entire stadium. Just giant. You know, I would say maybe, I half a mile to a mile across, almost even. At the very least, a full football stadium in size. And it was going really slow. It went directly over, almost centered, perfectly centered, almost above my truck and us. Anyway, the second thing I noticed when I finally noticed it was the stars were blotted out. Like a huge swath of the sky was blotted out. That was the second thing I noticed after the sound. Third thing I noticed was the weird light pattern. There was a crescent light pattern in the front, and then a line that went directly down the middle, and then a circular shape of lights in the back. They're all white. I'd say the crescent portion had 5 white lights. Then there was 5 or 6 running down the middle. These are large lights. 5 or 6 running down the middle, and then at the back it was I don't know, 5 I think, again, lights that were in a circular pattern. And the silhouette of this craft was, if you were to take, I don't know, 3/4 of an egg, so cut off 1/4 of an egg, just the end of it, and then put a golf ball up against it. So you have 3/4 of an egg running into a golf ball. That was the shape of this thing, except it's the size of a football stadium. And it's making this weird sound, and it's very, very slowly cruising directly over us. So I just look up and I look down at my friends, and they're all looking up and they're looking at it, obviously. And Ira, he just stopped reading. His mouth is just jaw dropped, eyes wide open. He didn't talk the whole time, actually. And me and Jason are looking at each other, looking up, looking at it like, okay, what is that? What the hell is that? What does that sound? Like, we didn't know what the hell we were looking at. We could see it and we could hear it. We all knew each other were seeing and hearing it, but none of us still really believed what we were looking at. And after a couple minutes, we just didn't talk to each other. We just watched this thing slowly cruise across the skyline. We watched it for a good 10 minutes. It had to have been at least 10 minutes. I mean, it wasn't going fast, and it didn't zip off or disappear or anything. It just slowly creeped out of our sight over the tree line until we couldn't see it anymore. And I've had a few of these encounters, and one of the weird things about them is when they happen, me and the people I'm with, we don't talk about it the next day, and we don't even talk about it the day after that. We don't talk about it for months. We always end up waiting a year or two before we bring it up again, and then when we do, it's kind of just awkward and weird. So anyway, I'd say a year or two later, I tried talking to Ira about it, and he wouldn't do it. He said, I'm not going to talk about this with you. This goes against my belief system. I can't do it. He at that time was very, very full-blown. I don't want to say Christian, because he was very, very adamant about his beliefs. Let's just put it that way. And so anyway, he wouldn't talk about it. I've never been able to get him to talk about it, and now I haven't spoken to him for years, and I don't know what he's up to or anything. But Jason, the other guy, was there back in I think it was 2011. So it was 8 years after the sighting. Me and him were roommates. We roommated with each other, moved into a house together. And one night, I just kind of brought it up, and I was, and we started talking about it and talking about the sound and everything. And then he starts describing what it looked like. And I'm like, wait, that just doesn't sound right. Because he started talking about red lights. I'm thinking, well, I didn't see it. I only saw white lights. So I asked him, I was like, okay, you draw what you saw, I'll draw what I saw. He described the sound being exactly the same, like the dog growling, a motorcycle underwater. He described the size being exactly the same. Just a massive football stadium size thing that just creeped over. It's very perplexing. This is probably as mind-boggling, if not more so mind-boggling, than the encounter itself. Okay, what I drew is what I described earlier: the crescent-shaped lights, the egg, and the circle, and white lights, and a total of maybe 15 to 20 lights. What he describes is a perfect square with, I'd say, 2 or 3 dozen bright red smaller lights lining the edges. That's what he saw go over us that night. A massive football stadium-sized square with red lights. I saw a massive football stadium, ovally shaped, circular shaped, white light. So, that to me, it definitely provided way more questions I have about that all of it. Any UFO counter, any paranormal, any supernatural, any of it. I have more questions about that stuff than I do answers. Because it just, I don't know, it wasn't we just saw something fly over us. It's we describe it in 2 completely different ways, visually anyway. Not as far as size, but as far as shape and color goes. And it's extremely confusing to me. I don't know. I am, even though I'm the one saying this, and there are skeptics out there that are probably going to listen to this and, be like, oh man, he's full of crap. You have to understand something. I am the biggest skeptic in this whole thing because I have no idea. I do not have a single answer on what happened that night. I don't know if it was a figment of our imaginations. We all shared some hallucination somehow. Some I don't know. Some implanted, I don't know. That's what I keep hearing. People are like, oh, you're just sharing hallucinations. And then people call it a day. They don't provide any evidence that we're sharing hallucinations. They just say, you're just sharing hallucinations. It's like, well, okay, if that's what's happening, how the hell are people all over the world sharing hallucinations simultaneously at the exact same time in the middle of the damn woods, especially? How does that happen? What's causing that? So anyway, I have a million questions. I don't know what we saw, how is even possible, because nothing man-made that we know of anyway. There's nothing. We can never, as far as we know, the general population puts something the size of a football stadium in the sky and have it just, kind of creep by. We don't have that technology. Or we do, and only a few people know about it. So I have no idea what we saw that night. I don't know if it was real, if it was aliens, if it was a hallucination, if it was... I don't know. But anyway, I just figured I'd share it. Maybe someone around the area around that time saw something similar. That's about all I can hope for. Maybe somebody else has had a similar experience somewhere else in the world where them and their friends saw something, but they kind of perceive it differently. But they're all sure that they saw something. But yeah, so that's one of my experiences. Thank you for listening, and yeah, if you want to see this kind of stuff for yourself, the only thing I can say is get out in the middle of nowhere as often as possible, because all the most amazing things, as far as this kind of thing goes, I've mostly been out in the middle of nowhere when I saw them, and I've had a pretty good view of the sky when it all happened. So, point being, if you're sitting at home watching TV or, sitting on your cell phone, or even if you do go out and you're just, face down into your tablet, you're probably not going to experience anything like this. Or maybe you will. I don't know. get outside. That's all I know. So, anyway, thank you.
I think we have a story that is maybe going to pull us back into the UFO world, a world that we probably both thought we escaped from maybe 20 years ago. So we'll share the story with Ryan, and we'll see what he and his listeners think. I'm Jordan Bonaparte. I host a show called the Nighttime Podcast, which covers Canadian crime and mysteries and UFO stories from across Canada. You are my brother, Jay, and tell us a bit about you.
Well, I live in Ottawa right now and play in a band called Paragon Cause, so we record a bunch of music and all that stuff, and then I actually work in the hospital here in Ottawa as well.
We both had a UFO experience maybe, I guess this was probably 25 years ago in Sydney, Nova Scotia, and I believe I was probably about 7 or 8 years old, so that would have put it probably late 80s. Is that when you remember this
that
happened?
sounds about right. I'm guessing I was 11, 12, that age.
Yeah. And it wasn't just us. Like, the way it went down is, and this is one of those things where I'm sure we both have a different recollection of it, but the way I remember it, it was like a school night, and we were at the top of the street in someone's backyard in the winter sledding, and it was like you and I, as well as all the neighborhood kids. Like, I remember everyone being there.
Yeah, there's like me, you, and maybe 10, 12 other kids. Like, I remember a bunch. I remember exactly who I was standing next to, who I was with, and it was the hill that we always went on. We were there every night in the winter sledding in the backyard.
Yeah, and the way the yard went is, like, our street was kind of a dead-end street, kind of built onto a hill, and when you were sledding, you were kind of going from the street down into, like, the woods that was, surrounded our dead-end street. So it was...
Yeah, there was like a boundary where the trees started at the bottom of the hill.
Yeah, exactly. And so, again, it was a school night. Sun, it couldn't have been that late because it was all the neighborhood kids that were out, but the sun was certainly down. It was nighttime. It was a dark sky.
Backlight floodlight was on, so it was late enough that I remember there was a floodlight illuminating the backyard.
Yeah, exactly. So when you were down the hill, you were like down in the darkness. Then you would pull your sled up the hill, up into the lit backyard is the way I recall it. And
exactly.
The way I remember it is I slid down the hill, and I was among the younger kids because most of the kids were like a year 3 or 4 years older than me. Most of them were around your age. So I remember being down the bottom of the hill, looking up at everyone kind of slowly coming down the hill and whatnot, sledding. And the way I remember it happening was this bizarre sound that almost sounded like just every bit of sound getting sucked out of the sky and out of the world. Like, I remembered like a second of split silence followed by the brightest light that I've ever seen. Like, it went from darkness to brighter than daylight instantly.
Yeah, so the weird thing is, me and you, I don't think we've talked about this.
Never like we are now, no.
No. And so, like, you're telling me that story kind of gave me the chills, because my recollection is I was standing next to my friend Brian, and I remember, it's weird because it's like clear as day. I remember me and Brian were like, all right, let's go down the hill. And we were kids, were like, let's count to 5 and we'll go. So we counted and we went down the hill, and I remember us kind of laughing. And to me, what I remember is, again, the trees, the woods, there's just that sound of the outdoors. And then all of a sudden it just stopped. Like nothing existed. There was no sound. It wasn't that it was quiet, it's that sound was gone. Mm-hmm. And to me, it felt like slow motion. Like I felt like time stopped. And I remember standing up, and then again, instantaneously, within, milliseconds, there was this light that felt like it was literally just a foot above my head that was so bright. But at the same time, I remember thinking that it was incredibly bright, but it wasn't really blinding me. Like I could see the light, and it was crazy bright. And I remember this slow motion feeling. I started turning my head to look up at the sky because I wanted to know what it was. And I still to this day remember it. And it was like slow motion. And as I looked up, what I remember is just this crazy light. Like I couldn't see anything. And then I remember it just kind of sucked itself into like a ball almost. And then just like seen it just kind of shoot off into the sky, but not like horizontally, like into the sky and then just go away. Mm-hmm. But I could see it like fly off into space, basically.
Yeah, I have the exact same memory. I remember when the light came and I realized like all of a sudden it was incredibly bright. I remember kind of shielding my eyes, and I almost have this vision burnt into my mind of like looking up at the hill, probably looking for my older brother, you. And I remember seeing all the kids kind of just standing there, looking at the sky and down at me. And I remember like the really hard shadow on the ground. Like every kid had like, like as a photographer, if you have the flash on, you get a really nasty shadow. I just remember this vision of all the kids with their like sleds in their hand, with a bright light shining on them. And at the same thing as what you said, I remember looking up, and as I did, I almost describe it as like the light being sucked into like the vacuum of space, because it just
exactly.
That's
exactly what it was.
Yeah, it just got smaller and just went away. And as it went away, the sound of the world came back kind of at the same pace.
And I don't know about you, but what I remember is silence. But then once it went away, kids started screaming and crying, and everybody ran home to their parents.
Yeah.
And to their houses.
Yeah.
It was great chaos.
I should ask Dad about it, because I do remember you and I and Brian and like all the kids just running down the street, freaking out. And I don't remember if we used the word UFO or like what we thought had happened, but I do remember like running home and like upset and telling Dad what had happened.
The other thing I remember, though, is I remember when it happened, I was looking towards the woods, and there was actually, I remember seeing like a line where it wasn't like a light that was diffusing, and it was like a bulb outside. I remember seeing a distinct line where the light stopped, and there was darkness beyond it. It was very, very weird. Like, it was light that, whatever it wasn't normal light. Like, it was not normal. It wasn't a spotlight from a helicopter. Like, it was abnormal, and I'm sure you'd agree. Like, it even felt different.
Yeah,
like it felt different.
Yeah, the way I remember it is, it did feel like the light was kind of in an area around us. Like there was spots like beyond where we were that were still dark.
Yeah.
But it wasn't a spotlight, like you said. For one, where we live, there would never be a helicopter above us shining lights at the kids. But
never.
But it was also a bigger area. Like it would have lit up probably the area of like one or two, yards that a house would be sitting on.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the other important thing is like behind this house, the woods behind our house is like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of kilometers. There's nothing else behind it. It's not like there's a little bit of forest and then another street. Like it is the forest until you hit water, basically.
Yeah, the ocean. Eventually you would get to.
Exactly. And I actually brought this up with this guy, Brian, and he won't talk about it. He's like, I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to talk about it. He won't talk about this. I have no idea why. It's bizarre. It's super bizarre, but it's a weird thing because, you experience that. And I think you probably agree, like, when people ask me if UFO exists, I'm like, yeah, I see, like, I'm not crazy. I'm a normal person. It is what it is. It's not, there's no other explanation. Like, it was there. And it kind of changes your perspective on life and your perspective in general, because it's weird when you know, but no one believes you. But at the same time, you're like, I know. Trust me.
I feel the exact same way. Well, we'll give this story to Ryan, and you never know, maybe we'll excite him and he'll investigate it and we can figure out what the hell happened.
Definitely.
All right, Jamie. Well, thanks for chatting this out with me, and hopefully Ryan can look into it, and maybe this will even inspire the next Paragon Cause song. Like, you guys should do something about this.
It already has. I think we may, right? We just, we're releasing a new album this week on next Friday, actually, on the 17th. And, if it wasn't for that UFO, I wouldn't have the talent to play the guitar, because I'm pretty sure they installed that in me. So I owe them a lot of money.
There you go. Well, this is perfect, Jay. Thanks for talking it out.
Thank you.
Somewhere in the Skies is produced by Third Kind Productions in association with the Entertainment One Podcast Network. To learn more, visit entertainmentonepodcast.com.